He wasn't supposed to make it through the night, the radio operator whispered. And in that single sentence, the entire weight of the world seemed to collapse into silence. Somewhere beyond the thin walls of a rural Montana outpost, winter was breathing hard against the earth, folding the pine forests in frost and darkness. Inside, under a flickering fluorescent light that hummed like a tired memory, a U.S. Marine lay still on a stretcher, his uniform dusted with road grit and rain, his breathing shallow but steady, as if each inhale was a negotiation with fate itself. Beside him, refusing to move even an inch, stood a German Shepherd K9 named Shadow, his body rigid, ears forward, eyes locked not on the room, but on the people inside it. He didn't bark. Not yet. He was listening in a way only those who have learned loss can understand. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fabric, but beneath it, something older lingered. Loyalty, the kind that doesn't ask permission to stay. Outside, the storm pressed closer, wind brushing against the windows like a warning that the world never truly waits for anyone to heal. The Marine's hand twitched once, barely noticeable, but Shadow noticed. Every shift of breath, every hesitation of life, was a language they had built together long before this moment. A medic stepped closer, checking monitors, speaking in low, clinical tones, but Shadow's attention sharpened, as if he understood something in the rhythm of those words that others did not. The Marine had been pulled from a collapsed structure hours earlier, the kind of place where time fractures and decisions are made in seconds that last forever, and yet now, in this quiet in-between space, nothing felt finished. Memory came in fragments, the sound of boots on gravel, a morning briefing under pale sky, a laugh shared over bitter coffee that now felt like it belonged to another life entirely. Shadow shifted his weight slightly, stepping closer to the stretcher, placing one paw gently on the metal frame as if anchoring his partner to the world. The motion was small, almost unnoticeable, but it carried the kind of meaning no report could ever capture. The Marine's eyelids fluttered, just for a moment, and in that fragile flicker of awareness, his gaze found the dog. No words were exchanged, only recognition, deeper than language, older than fear. It was the kind of bond forged not in comfort, but in long nights where silence was the only companion. The medic paused, uncertain, watching the stillness between them shift into something heavier, something almost sacred in its simplicity. Outside, the storm eased just slightly, as if even the wind had decided to listen. Shadow didn't move. He simply waited, steady as stone, as if he had all the time in the world, even when the world itself did not. And in that quiet room, where machines measured life in numbers and humans measured it in hope, something unspoken held its ground. A promise that no matter how fragile a moment becomes, it is never alone when loyalty refuses to let go. The fluorescent hum of Cooper General Hospital presses down like a weight on the early morning silence. Sterile lights spilling across polished floors that smell faintly of disinfectant and cold metal. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr lies half reclined on the hospital bed, his breath slow but uneven, each inhale carrying the ache of a body that has been pushed beyond its limits. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow stands rigid, paws planted wide, amber eyes locked on the figure in a white coat moving too precisely, too calmly, as if every motion has been rehearsed. The German Shepherd does not blink often. He watches the doctor the way he once watched distant tree leans in hostile terrain, reading shifts in posture, in scent, in intention that no human voice has ever taught him. Inside Lucas's mind, fragments of memory drift like broken radio signals, the dockside mission, the faint chemical scent in the cargo container, the moment everything went wrong without warning. He tries to move his hand, but the foreline pulls gently, grounding him back to the present. The doctor checks the monitor, lips moving in quiet calculation, writing something on a clipboard without looking at Lucas for more than a second. Shadow's growl deepens, low and controlled, not loud enough to alarm the entire ward, but heavy enough to change the air itself. A passing nurse slows, sensing the shift, her eyes moving from the dog to the doctor and back again with unease she cannot explain. Lucas turns his head slightly, vision blurred at the edges, and through the glass he sees Shadow take one slow step forward, pressing closer to the barrier as if testing the boundary between instinct and obedience. The memory of Kandahar flickers through Lucas's thoughts, Shadow beside him then too, alerting him to danger before words ever could. The doctor finally pauses, sensing the attention in the room shift, and adjusts his gloves with a smoothness that feels unnatural in its calm. Outside, Shadow's ears tilt forward, locking onto a subtle sound. The faint click of something metallic, the soft rustle of fabric that does not belong in a place of healing. Lucas tries to speak, but his voice catches in his throat, a weak sound lost in the sterile air. The nurse steps closer, hesitating, watching Shadow now more than the monitor, as if realizing that whatever is unfolding is not visible on any medical chart. Shadow's posture lowers slightly, not aggressive, but anchored, as though he has decided that leaving is not an option. The doctor glances toward the glass for the first time, his expression unreadable, then returns to his work with a fraction too much speed. In that moment, something unspoken passes between man and dog, a recognition older than language, built from years of shared silence under fire and rain. Lucas's fingers twitch against the sheet, a small sign of awareness, and Shadow responds instantly, stepping closer until his breath fogs the glass, refusing to look away, refusing to yield to anything the room is trying to hide. The hospital corridor feels narrower now, as if the air itself has tightened around Cooper General Hospital. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains on the bed, his breathing uneven but steadier than before, eyes struggling to focus through the haze of medication and exhaustion. Beyond the glass, Shadow stands completely still, his body aligned like a statue carved from instinct and loyalty, amber eyes locked on the man in the white coat, who continues to move with careful precision near the medical equipment. The nurse beside him shifts uncomfortably, glancing between the monitor and the dog, sensing a tension she cannot explain in medical terms. Lucas tries to lift his head slightly, and the effort sends a dull wave of pain through his chest, forcing him back into the pillow. His mind drifts again to the dockside mission, the shipment containers, the moment Shadow first changed his posture, the exact same stillness he now displays in the hospital. It is not fear in the dog's stance, but recognition, a deep, unsettling certainty. The doctor adjusts a setting on the forestand, movements controlled, too measured, as if avoiding unnecessary attention. Shadow responds with a low, sustained rumble that does not rise into chaos, but instead anchors the entire room in quiet alarm. A second nurse pauses at the doorway, noticing the shift in atmosphere, her hand hovering near her tablet, as if unsure whether to call for assistance or wait for confirmation. Lucas finally manages a weak voice, barely more than a breath, trying to call Shadow's name, and though no sound fully carries, the dog reacts instantly, turning his head just slightly toward the glass as if hearing what others cannot. The connection between them feels unbroken despite distance, time, and injury. The doctor briefly glances at the monitor again, then toward the hallway, where footsteps echo faintly from approaching staff, and something in his posture tightens for only a fraction of a second before returning to calm professionalism. Shadow takes one slow step forward, then stops, pressing his nose closer to the glass as if trying to bridge the barrier separating him from his handler. Lucas watches this through blurred vision, and in that moment, memory and present begin to overlap, training exercises, battlefield alerts, silent commands understood without speech. The nurse beside the doctor finally speaks softly, asking if the dog should be moved, but her voice lacks certainty, as if she already knows the answer will not resolve the tension in the room. Shadow does not bark, does not lunge, does not break discipline. Instead, he holds his position with unwavering focus, as though guarding something far more fragile than a person or a procedure. Lucas's fingers twitch again, a small sign of awareness, and the monitor reflects a slight change in rhythm, subtle but enough to draw attention from the medical staff. The doctor straightens slowly, scanning the room with an expression that remains carefully neutral, yet no longer entirely comfortable. Outside, Shadow finally shifts his weight, lowering his head just slightly, not in submission, but in deliberate decision, as if confirming a truth only he has fully understood. The hospital feels quieter now, even with the distant sounds of activity continuing beyond the ward, because everything in this small space has narrowed to a single point of tension, where instinct, memory, and unseen intent converge without words. Lucas exhales slowly, eyes half open, and in that fragile moment between wakefulness and fading awareness, he senses that Shadow is not reacting to confusion or fear, but to something real enough to change everything that comes next. The sterile hum of Cooper General Hospital grows heavier as time stretches forward, pressing against every surface like an unseen pressure that refuses to lift. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains half-conscious on the bed, his breathing uneven but gradually stabilizing under the steady rhythm of medical monitoring. His eyes drift open and closed, catching fragments of movement beyond the glass, where Shadow continues to stand unwavering, his presence no longer passive but intensely focused, as if the entire world has narrowed down to a single point of observation. The German Shepherd's posture is rigid yet controlled, ears forward, body aligned, eyes fixed not on the general activity of the ward, but specifically on the man in the white coat, who now steps slightly away from the equipment, adjusting his gloves with slow, deliberate motion. The nurse beside him shifts her weight again, uncertainty growing in her expression as she glances at Shadow and then at Lucas, noticing subtle changes in the atmosphere that cannot be explained by charts or monitors. Lucas tries to speak again, his lips barely moving, but no audible sound escapes, only a faint breath that fades into the sterile air. Shadow reacts anyway, turning his head slightly toward Lucas for a fraction of a second before refocusing on the doctor, maintaining a balance between connection and vigilance that feels almost human in its complexity. A second nurse approaches the hallway entrance, hesitating as she senses the tension that has quietly spread through the room, her steps slowing as if the air itself is signaling caution. The doctor glances at her briefly, offering a calm nod, yet something in his posture remains subtly restrained, as though every movement is being carefully measured against an internal calculation. Shadow takes one slow step forward, then stops again, pressing closer to the glass with controlled intent, not aggressive but resolute, as if acknowledging something that does not belong in a place meant for healing. Lucas's mind flickers with fragmented memory, the dockside container, the faint chemical warning, Shadow's earlier alert, and the realization that the same instinct now governs this hospital moment without change or hesitation. The monitor beside Lucas emits a steady tone, but even that sound feels distant compared to the silent confrontation unfolding beyond the glass. The nurse beside the doctor finally speaks in a low voice, suggesting a routine adjustment to the room environment, yet her words lack conviction, as if she is responding to something she cannot fully identify. Shadow's gaze remains locked forward, unwavering, his entire body communicating a certainty that bypasses explanation. Lucas shifts slightly, enough to register the dog's silhouette against the glass, and in that fragile connection, he feels an unspoken reassurance mixed with urgency, as though Shadow is holding the line between safety and something still undefined. The doctor straightens his posture, glancing once more toward the hallway before returning his attention to the equipment, his expression unchanged but his movements marginally faster, controlled in a way that suggests quiet awareness of being observed. The air in the room feels thinner now, not physically but emotionally, as if every person present is unconsciously aware that something critical is unfolding without sound. Shadow lowers his head slightly, not in submission, but in a deliberate, grounded stance that signals readiness without escalation. Lucas exhales slowly, eyes half open, and in that moment of fragile clarity he understands that what Shadow senses is not confusion or fear, but alignment with something deeply real that has not yet revealed its full shape. The hospital corridor remains calm on the surface, yet beneath it runs a current of tension that no instrument can measure, only instinct can detect. And in that silent space between breath and certainty, Shadow refuses to look away. The quiet tension inside Cooper General Hospital reaches a point where even the most ordinary sounds feel amplified, the distant rolling of carts, the soft rhythm of shoes against polished floors, the muted hum of medical machines. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr lies still, his breathing now steadier, though his eyes remain half open, drifting between awareness and exhaustion as his body fights to recover strength. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow has not moved from his position, but something in his presence has changed, a deeper focus settling into his frame, as if he has confirmed a truth that does not require human approval. The German Shepherd's gaze remains locked forward, no longer shifting between objects or people, but fixed entirely on the man in the white coat, whose movements have become slightly more deliberate, slightly more contained. The nurse beside him notices the shift in Shadow's posture and hesitates, her hand hovering near her communication device, unsure whether to escalate a concern she cannot fully articulate. Lucas tries again to lift his head, this time managing a faint turn toward the glass, and what he sees is not chaos, but precision, a silent confrontation defined entirely by presence rather than action. Shadow lowers his body fractionally, grounding himself closer to the floor, not in fear but in readiness, as if anchoring himself to the space between certainty and prevention. The doctor steps away from the equipment for a moment, glancing down the hallway where another staff member approaches, then returns with a calmness that feels increasingly practiced rather than natural. The nurse beside him speaks softly, suggesting a routine check adjustment, but her voice carries a slight tremor of uncertainty that contrasts with the sterile order of the room. Shadow responds by shifting his weight forward again, placing himself directly in line with the glass, reducing the distance between observation and intention to nothing but transparency. Lucas's thoughts drift in fragmented clarity, recalling how Shadow once reacted in the field to something unseen by everyone else, how that same stillness preceded every critical moment they survived together. The monitor beside Lucas emits a steady rhythm, unchanged on the surface, yet the emotional weight in the room continues to rise, as if something unspoken is tightening around the edges of reality. The doctor pauses again, this time longer, his eyes scanning the room not with urgency, but with calculation that is subtle enough to remain unnoticed by most, but not by the dog who watches without blinking. Shadow's ears remain fixed forward, capturing not just sound but intention, reading shifts in movement that occur before decisions are made. Lucas exhales slowly, his hand twitching against the sheet, a small involuntary motion that signals presence returning more fully to awareness. The nurse nearest the glass takes a step back without realizing it, reacting not to any visible threat, but to the undeniable intensity of the silence that now dominates the space. Shadow does not change his stance, but his focus sharpens further, as if confirming that whatever he is sensing has now reached a threshold that cannot be ignored. The corridor outside remains active with normal hospital flow, yet inside this small enclosed space, time feels compressed, every second carrying disproportionate weight. Lucas watches through blurred vision as Shadow holds his position with unwavering discipline, a living boundary between what is known and what is still concealed. The doctor finally turns slightly toward the room, acknowledging the dog's presence directly for the first time without speaking, and in that brief moment of mutual awareness, the air feels charged with a quiet understanding that something essential has already been recognized without a single word being exchanged. The hospital corridor outside Cooper General Hospital's intensive care unit feels longer now, as if the building itself is holding its breath. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains in bed, eyes half open, consciousness drifting in and out like a signal struggling to stay connected. His breathing has stabilized, but his mind is still caught between present awareness and fragmented memory. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow remains locked in place, his stance unchanged yet increasingly absolute, as though time itself no longer has influence over his decision to remain. The German Shepherd's amber eyes do not wander. They are fixed entirely on the man in the white coat, whose movements have slowed but become more intentional, each step measured with quiet discipline. The nurse standing beside him shifts her weight again, her gaze flickering between the monitor and the dog, unable to explain the rising unease she feels in a place designed for certainty and control. Lucas turns his head slightly, struggling to focus through fatigue, and what he sees is not confusion but alignment, as if every element in the room has settled into positions that were always meant to be there. Shadow lowers his head just slightly, pressing closer to the glass, not as a reaction, but as a confirmation, as though something unspoken has reached its final form of recognition. The doctor steps away from the equipment for a brief moment, glancing down the corridor where another staff member passes, then returns to his position with a composure that now feels carefully maintained rather than naturally calm. The nurse speaks softly, suggesting a routine adjustment in procedure, but her voice carries a hesitation that does not match the clinical environment. Shadow does not respond with movement, but his presence intensifies in stillness, a controlled focus that fills the space between him and everything he observes. Lucas exhales slowly, the motion small but deliberate, his hand twitching against the sheet as awareness strengthens. In that fragile return to clarity, he begins to notice details he had not registered before: the subtle pacing of footsteps, the timing of glances, the pauses that do not belong to routine behavior. The monitor beside him continues its steady rhythm, but the emotional atmosphere in the room feels increasingly compressed, as if invisible pressure is building without any external sound. The doctor finally turns his head slightly toward Shadow, acknowledging the dog directly for the first time, and holds that gaze without speaking, creating a moment of silent confrontation that lasts only seconds but feels significantly longer. Shadow does not break eye contact. Instead, he lowers his body a fraction more, grounding himself fully, as if drawing a line that cannot be crossed. The nurse nearest the glass takes a small step backward without conscious thought, reacting to something she cannot identify but instinctively respects. Lucas watches through blurred vision as Shadow remains unwavering, a living barrier between uncertainty and control, between what is known and what is still unfolding. The doctor's expression remains neutral, yet there is a subtle shift in his posture, a tightening of restraint that suggests awareness of being fully observed. In the corridor outside, normal hospital activity continues: footsteps, distant voices, rolling equipment. But inside this enclosed space, those sounds feel distant and disconnected, as if separated by an invisible boundary. Shadow finally tilts his head slightly, not breaking focus but refining it, as though confirming that whatever he has sensed has now reached undeniable clarity. Lucas's breathing steadies further, and in that moment he understands without words that Shadow is not reacting to uncertainty, but to recognition, something precise, something real enough to hold the entire room in suspended tension. The silence inside Cooper General Hospital shifts again, not breaking but reshaping itself into something more deliberate, as if the entire room has moved one step closer to understanding an unseen truth. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains in bed, eyes now more open than before, consciousness gradually anchoring him to the present with increasing stability. The steady rhythm of the monitor beside him continues, but his attention is no longer drifting. It is focused, drawn toward the glass partition where Shadow remains completely still, his entire body aligned with a precision that feels almost ceremonial. The German Shepherd's amber eyes do not waver, fixed on the man in the white coat, whose posture now carries a subtle change, less fluid than before, more contained, as if he is aware that observation has become mutual. The nurse beside him shifts again, this time more visibly, her hand hovering near the communication panel, uncertainty giving way to cautious attention. Lucas turns his head further than before, the effort stronger now, and what he sees is not chaos or confusion, but a convergence of awareness, as if all elements in the room have quietly agreed to reveal themselves at once. Shadow lowers his head slightly, pressing closer to the glass, not in aggression but in confirmation, as though whatever he has sensed has now reached its final and undeniable form. The doctor pauses entirely, his attention shifting from the equipment to the environment around him, eyes scanning with calm precision that no longer hides its awareness of being fully observed. A second staff member enters the corridor, slowing as they approach the room, sensing the unusual stillness that does not belong to routine medical procedure. The nurse beside the doctor finally speaks more clearly, suggesting a cross-check of materials used earlier in the procedure, her tone now steady but careful, as if connecting details she had not considered before. Shadow remains motionless except for a subtle shift in weight, grounding himself even further, his presence no longer reactive but declarative, as if confirming alignment between memory and reality. Lucas's breathing steadies, and with it his awareness sharpens enough to recognize fragments of earlier confusion now resolving into structure, recalling the dockside incident, the shipment containers, the chemical scent that Shadow had reacted to without hesitation. The doctor slowly reaches toward a small medical tray, pausing briefly before adjusting its position, and in that motion something subtle changes in the room's perception, a realization forming without spoken confirmation. The nurse near the doorway takes a cautious step forward again, this time with intent rather than hesitation, her focus narrowing on the materials in use. Shadow's gaze shifts for the first time in several minutes, not away from the doctor, but toward the tray, then back again, reinforcing a silent connection that ties present moment to earlier instinct. Lucas exhales slowly, and his hand moves faintly against the sheet, not from distress, but from awareness returning fully to him, as if pieces of a fragmented puzzle are finally locking into place. The doctor finally speaks in a calm, measured tone, addressing the room with controlled clarity, acknowledging a procedural verification that aligns with standard safety protocol, his voice steady but no longer detached. The nurse responds immediately, confirming steps with increasing confidence, her earlier uncertainty replaced by focused professionalism. Shadow does not relax, but his posture shifts from confrontation to watchful confirmation, as though the purpose of his vigilance has reached resolution. Lucas watches through the glass as the room transitions from tension into controlled action, medical staff coordinating with quiet precision, not urgency, but verification guiding their movements. The corridor beyond resumes its natural rhythm, footsteps and distant voices returning without disruption, yet inside this space, something fundamental has changed. The doctor glances once more toward Shadow, this time with acknowledgement rather than analysis, a brief moment of understanding passing between them without words. Shadow holds that gaze for a final second before easing slightly, his body no longer pressed forward but still attentive, as if satisfied that what needed to be seen has been seen. Lucas closes his eyes briefly, not in exhaustion but in release, as the weight of uncertainty lifts just enough for his breathing to settle into calm steadiness. The room returns to its clinical normalcy, yet beneath that surface remains the quiet imprint of what was sensed, confirmed, and understood without ever needing to be spoken aloud. The atmosphere inside Cooper General Hospital settles into a quieter rhythm, as if the entire building has exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains in bed, more awake now, his eyes open with a steady awareness that replaces earlier confusion with calm recognition of the present moment. The medical monitor beside him continues its steady pattern, no longer carrying tension, but instead marking a return to normal stability. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow stands in a posture that has softened just slightly, no longer pressing forward with intense vigilance, but maintaining a quiet presence that reflects confirmation rather than alarm. The German Shepherd's amber eyes still observe the room, yet the focus has shifted from investigation to assurance, as if the answers he sought have aligned with what he already understood instinctively. The man in the white coat now moves with deliberate normalcy, speaking in a calm, even tone with the nursing staff, his earlier precision now matching routine procedure rather than hidden tension. The nurse beside him nods in agreement, reviewing documentation on her device, her expression composed and professional, the earlier uncertainty replaced with clear understanding. Lucas watches this exchange through the glass, his breathing slow and steady, the weight of uncertainty that had filled the room now lifted into something far more ordinary and grounding. He notices Shadow's posture change subtly, the dog easing his stance by a fraction, not withdrawing, but transitioning from high alert to watchful calm. The connection between them remains intact, yet it no longer carries urgency, instead settling into a quiet presence of trust. The doctor speaks again, this time addressing the staff in a measured tone, confirming that all procedures followed standard safety protocols and that any irregular readings were linked to a temporary and harmless environmental factor that has now been fully corrected. The nurse responds with confirmation, her voice steady, documenting the resolution with practiced efficiency. Lucas exhales slowly, his hand relaxing against the hospital sheet, the tension that had lingered in his muscles dissolving into relief that feels both physical and emotional. Shadow tilts his head slightly, observing the final exchanges, then shifts his weight back, signaling that his internal assessment has reached completion. There is no longer any urgency in his stance, only awareness and presence, as if he has accepted the explanation not through words, but through alignment of everything he has observed. The corridor outside continues its normal flow, footsteps and distant conversations returning to their natural cadence, the hospital resuming its identity as a place of care rather than uncertainty. Inside the room, Lucas turns his head slightly toward the glass once more, meeting Shadow's gaze directly, and in that moment there is no alarm, no confusion, only recognition between two beings who have shared more than spoken understanding. The dog holds that gaze briefly, then relaxes further, standing fully at ease for the first time since the tension began. The nurse steps away from the bedside, making a final note, her movements calm and routine, while the doctor returns to reviewing charts with quiet focus. Lucas closes his eyes for a moment, not from fatigue, but from relief that settles deep into his breathing, as if his body finally acknowledges safety. When he opens them again, Shadow is still there, but no longer rigid, simply present, loyal, and steady, a silent reminder that vigilance and peace can exist in the same breath when trust has been confirmed without words. The late afternoon light outside Cooper General Hospital shifts softly through the tall windows, casting long, quiet reflections across the polished floor of the intensive care unit. Inside, the atmosphere has fully transitioned from tension into calm continuity, as if the entire space has accepted a return to normal rhythm after an unspoken moment of recognition. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains in bed, more alert now, his breathing steady and natural, eyes open and following the movement of staff with clear awareness. The monitor beside him continues its steady rhythm, no longer a point of concern but a quiet confirmation of stability. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow stands in a relaxed but attentive posture, no longer rigid or locked in analysis, but present with calm certainty, his amber eyes still occasionally scanning the room, yet without urgency. The German shepherd's body language has softened, his weight evenly distributed, ears in a neutral position, signaling that the heightened vigilance has fully transitioned into trust. The man in the white coat moves through routine procedures with the nursing staff, speaking in measured tones, reviewing final notes with professional composure. The nurse beside him nods, confirming final entries in the system, her movements smooth and confident, the earlier uncertainty completely dissolved into clarity of procedure. Lucas watches this quietly, his head slightly turned toward the glass, taking in the full scene without strain, as if reconnecting fully to the present after a long period of internal distance. Shadow notices the shift in Lucas's attention and responds not with tension, but with a subtle adjustment, lifting his head slightly, acknowledging the connection without breaking his calm stance. The corridor beyond the room continues its steady flow of hospital activity, footsteps and distant voices blending into a consistent rhythm that reinforces the return to normalcy. The doctor finishes reviewing the final chart, exchanges a brief confirmation with the nurse, and steps back from the bedside area, signaling the conclusion of active observation. Lucas exhales slowly, a deeper and more complete breath than before, as if his body has finally aligned with the reassurance his mind is beginning to accept fully. Shadow takes a small step back from the glass, not leaving, but repositioning into a more natural stance, no longer guarding against uncertainty, but simply remaining close. The nurse approaches Lucas briefly, checking his vitals with calm efficiency, her expression now entirely composed, offering a quiet reassurance without needing words. Lucas gives a slight nod in response, his eyes softening, the earlier weight of concern replaced by a grounded sense of stability. Shadow shifts his gaze once more toward Lucas, and in that brief moment, the connection between them feels complete, not driven by urgency or warning, but by shared understanding of safety confirmed through instinct and experience. The doctor makes one final note on the tablet, then closes the record with a subtle motion, signaling the official end of the procedure review. The room feels lighter now, not changed in structure, but in emotional temperature, as if the unseen pressure that once filled it has fully dissipated. Lucas rests his head back against the pillow, eyes half closed, no longer searching or analyzing, simply present in recovery. Shadow remains in place, calm and steady, his presence now a quiet anchor rather than a warning signal, holding the space with loyalty that does not require interpretation. The final moments settle into stillness, not of uncertainty, but of resolution, where everything that needed to be seen has been acknowledged, and everything that needed to be understood has already been understood without a single spoken explanation. The final hours inside Cooper General Hospital arrive with a softness that feels almost unreal compared to the tension that once filled its corridors. Afternoon light fades into early evening, stretching golden reflections across the polished floors and quiet glass surfaces of the intensive care unit. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr now sits slightly more upright in bed, no longer overwhelmed by fatigue, his breathing steady and controlled, as if his body has finally synchronized with the calm that surrounds him. The medical monitor beside him continues its gentle rhythm, no longer the center of attention, but a background confirmation that stability has been restored. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow remains in view, no longer standing in rigid alertness, but resting in a composed, grounded posture, his presence calm yet attentive, like a guardian who has completed his watch but refuses to fully leave his post. The German Shepherd's amber eyes move slowly across the room, not scanning for threat, but acknowledging environment, people, and the subtle rhythms of a place he now accepts as safe. The doctor enters once more, this time not with urgency, but with closure in his movements, followed by the nurse who carries a tablet with final discharge notes. Their voices are low, professional, and steady, confirming that Lucas's condition is stable and that he can transition to recovery care without further monitoring and intensive observation. Lucas listens quietly, absorbing the words without tension, his eyes occasionally shifting toward Shadow, as if ensuring the connection between them remains unbroken. Shadow responds with a slow blink, a subtle movement that carries more meaning than any spoken reassurance, signaling understanding rather than reaction. The nurse steps closer to adjust Lucas's foreline, her expression calm and almost relieved, the earlier uncertainty now replaced with quiet professionalism and ease. Lucas exhales deeply, a full breath that feels like release, and for the first time since arriving, there is no weight pressing behind his thoughts. The doctor closes the chart on his device and offers a final nod, a gesture of completion rather than procedure, then steps back from the bedside as the room transitions fully into post-care silence. Shadow shifts slightly, lowering his body into a more relaxed stance, still alert, but no longer bound to vigilance, as if confirming that his duty in this space has reached its natural conclusion. Lucas slowly turns his head toward the glass, meeting Shadow's gaze directly, and in that moment there is no distance between hospital and corridor, no separation between patient and guardian, only continuity of trust built through shared experience that required no language to establish. The nurse gives a final brief instruction about follow-up care, her tone gentle and routine, while Lucas nods in acknowledgement, his attention still anchored to the presence beyond the glass. Shadow takes one final step closer, not pressing forward, but closing the remaining distance just enough to be seen clearly, then settles again into stillness, as if marking the end of observation and the beginning of something quieter. The corridor outside continues its natural hospital rhythm, but inside this space, time feels complete, no longer fragmented by uncertainty or tension. Lucas rests back against the pillow, his eyes soft, no longer searching, no longer analyzing, simply present in recovery and awareness. Shadow remains where he is, calm and steady, his silhouette framed by the glass and fading light. A final living reminder that loyalty does not end when danger passes, it only changes its shape into something quieter, something constant, something that stays even after everything else has settled into peace. Evening settles over Cooper General Hospital with a quiet softness, the kind that turns harsh edges into calm silhouettes and long reflections across polished floors. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr now sits more comfortably in his bed, his posture no longer guarded, his breathing steady and natural as recovery takes hold in full. The medical monitor beside him continues its gentle rhythm, no longer a source of concern, but a quiet confirmation of stability. The room feels different now, not because anything has changed structurally, but because the emotional weight that once filled it has fully dissolved. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow remains present, no longer in a fixed stance of vigilance, but in a composed and grounded position that reflects acceptance rather than alert. His amber eyes move slowly, scanning the room with calm familiarity, no longer searching for threat, but acknowledging presence, movement, and safety as established truth. The doctor and nurse complete their final steps near the bedside, their voices low and professional, confirming discharge readiness and outlining follow-up care instructions in a steady, unhurried tone. Lucas listens quietly, his attention no longer divided between uncertainty and instinct, but fully anchored in the present moment. He occasionally shifts his gaze toward Shadow, and each time, the connection between them feels intact, steady, and unbroken by distance or glass. The nurse adjusts the final 4-line and checks the monitor one last time, her expression calm and slightly relieved, as if closing a chapter that required precision but no longer demands tension. The doctor offers a final nod, closing the chart on his device, signaling the end of active care within this space. Shadow responds not with movement, but with presence, lowering his body into a relaxed stance that still carries awareness, but no longer urgency. Lucas exhales deeply, a slow and complete breath that reflects release rather than exhaustion, as if something internal has finally settled into alignment with the world around him. The corridor beyond continues its normal hospital rhythm, footsteps and distant voices blending into a steady backdrop that reinforces the return to routine. Inside the room, however, everything feels quieter, not empty, but resolved. Lucas turns his head slightly toward the glass, meeting Shadow's gaze directly, and in that exchange there is no warning, no tension, only recognition shaped by shared experience that required no explanation. Shadow holds the gaze for a moment longer, then subtly relaxes further, shifting his weight as if confirming that his role in this space has reached completion. The nurse steps back from the bedside, offering a final instruction in a calm tone, her presence now purely procedural, no longer interpretive. Lucas nods once, slowly, acknowledging both instruction and closure. The doctor steps away, joining the nurse near the doorway, their conversation fading into quiet professionalism as they prepare to leave the room. Shadow remains in place, framed by the glass and fading light, his posture steady but no longer tense, embodying a presence that is constant rather than reactive. Lucas leans back against the pillow, his eyes softening, no longer searching the room for meaning or threat, but simply resting within it. The atmosphere settles into a final equilibrium, where everything that needed to be observed has been observed, everything that needed to be understood has been understood, and what remains is not vigilance, but peace carried quietly between a man recovering and the loyal presence that never once looked away. The final light of evening settles gently across Cooper General Hospital, softening the sterile edges of the intensive care unit into something almost peaceful, as if the building itself is exhaling after a long silence. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr sits upright now, fully stable, no longer carried by uncertainty or fatigue, his breathing calm and natural as recovery reaches its quiet completion. The medical monitor beside him continues its steady rhythm, no longer a signal of concern, but a simple confirmation of life moving forward without disruption. The room feels different in a way that cannot be measured, not because anything physical has changed, but because everything emotional has finally come to rest. Beyond the glass partition, Shadow remains present, no longer rigid or scanning for hidden threats, but standing in a composed and grounded posture that reflects completion rather than vigilance. His amber eyes move slowly across the room, observing without urgency, as if confirming that every element he once questioned has now resolved into clarity. The doctor and nurse complete their final administrative steps near the bedside, their movements calm, efficient, and familiar, speaking in low voices that carry no tension, only closure. Lucas listens without strain, his gaze occasionally drifting toward Shadow, and each time their eyes meet, the connection feels steady, unbroken, and deeply understood without need for words. The nurse checks the final readings on the monitor, then gently disconnects a line with careful precision, her expression composed and quietly relieved, as though closing a chapter that demanded attention but no longer carries weight. The doctor reviews the final notes on his device, then pauses briefly, offering a small nod that signals not just medical completion, but the end of uncertainty within this space. Shadow responds by shifting his weight slightly, easing further into a relaxed stance, his presence still attentive but now fully at ease, as if accepting that his role in this moment has reached its natural conclusion. Lucas exhales deeply, a long and steady breath that carries no trace of tension, only release, as his body and mind finally align in calm awareness. The corridor beyond continues its steady rhythm of hospital life, footsteps and distant conversations blending into a consistent background that reinforces normality, returning to every corner of the building. Inside the room, however, everything feels suspended in quiet balance, not empty, but complete, as if all necessary understanding has already taken place. Lucas turns his head slightly toward the glass, meeting Shadow's gaze directly, and in that exchange there is no urgency, no warning, only recognition shaped by shared experience that required no explanation and no validation. Shadow holds the gaze for a moment longer, then slowly settles into an even calmer posture, confirming through stillness that nothing remains unresolved between them. The nurse steps away from the bedside, offering a final instruction in a gentle tone about recovery care and rest, her voice now purely informational, no longer carrying concern. Lucas gives a small, deliberate nod in acknowledgement, his expression calm and grounded, as if accepting not just instructions but the transition into what comes next. The doctor steps back toward the doorway, exchanging a final quiet word with the nurse before preparing to leave, their presence fading from the center of attention into the background of routine care. Shadow remains visible through the glass, framed by fading light, his silhouette steady and composed, embodying a loyalty that does not end when crisis passes, but transforms into something quieter and enduring. Lucas leans back into the pillow, his eyes soft, no longer searching for meaning or reading tension in every movement, but simply existing within a space that has finally become safe. The final moments settle into stillness that is not absence, but resolution, where everything that needed to be understood has already been understood, and what remains is the quiet bond between a man healing and the presence that never once looked away. The evening inside Cooper General Hospital deepens into a calm that feels almost sacred, as if the building itself has finally settled into silence after a long and unseen storm. Staff Sergeant Lucas Rohr remains seated in bed, now fully stable and fully aware, his posture relaxed in a way that reflects both physical recovery and emotional grounding. The steady rhythm of the medical monitor beside him has become nothing more than background life, a soft reminder that everything critical has passed, and what remains is simply healing. Outside the glass partition, Shadow continues to stand in quiet presence, no longer watching for danger, no longer analyzing every movement with intensity, but instead resting in a composed and steady stance that reflects completion rather than vigilance. His amber eyes move slowly across the room one final time, not searching, not reacting, but acknowledging the space as safe, known, and resolved. The doctor and nurse remain near the doorway, finishing final procedural confirmations in calm voices, their professionalism now blended with quiet relief as they conclude the last steps of care. Lucas listens without tension, his breathing slow and natural, his gaze occasionally drifting toward Shadow with a sense of recognition that no longer carries urgency, only understanding. The nurse speaks gently about discharge timing and recovery instructions, her tone soft and steady, no longer carrying concern but guidance for what comes next beyond the hospital walls. Lucas nods once, a simple and grounded motion that reflects acceptance not just of medical recovery, but of the moment itself. Shadow shifts his weight slightly, easing further into rest, his posture now fully relaxed while still present, as if confirming that his role in this place has transitioned from active vigilance into quiet companionship. The doctor offers a final look at the monitor and then at Lucas, giving a calm and professional nod that signals full stability and closure. There is no urgency left in the room, only completion, like a story reaching its final quiet page. Lucas exhales deeply, a breath that feels complete in every sense. And for a moment his eyes close, as if allowing the entire weight of the experience to settle into memory rather than presence. When he opens them again, Shadow is still there, unchanged in loyalty, steady in presence, no longer guarding against uncertainty, but simply remaining as a reminder of trust that does not require explanation. The nurse steps back fully, collecting her device and preparing to leave, her movements smooth and unhurried, blending into the natural rhythm of a hospital returning to normal evening flow. The doctor follows, pausing briefly at the threshold before exiting, leaving the room quieter than before, but not empty. Lucas slowly turns his head toward the glass one final time, meeting Shadow's gaze directly, and in that shared moment there is no need for instruction, no need for interpretation. Only the quiet acknowledgement of a bond formed through instinct, experience, and presence. Shadow holds that gaze for a final second, then eases completely into calm stillness, his body language reflecting peace rather than duty, as if confirming that nothing remains unresolved between them. The corridor outside continues its gentle flow of footsteps and distant voices, but inside the room everything has reached equilibrium. Lucas rests back against the pillow, no longer scanning, no longer waiting, simply existing in a space where safety is no longer questioned. Shadow remains visible through the glass, framed by fading hospital light, a silent presence that embodies loyalty without condition and awareness without fear. In this final quiet moment, nothing is left to prove, nothing is left to chase. Only a simple truth that remains unspoken yet fully understood, that even after uncertainty passes, the bond between a human heart and a faithful companion continues to endure in silence, in presence, and in peace.